Chapter 8, Rio. We are called to be architects of the future, not its victims. R. Buckminster Fuller. Rio de Janeiro was alive with energy as the WellBe and AI conference opened its doors for the 2078 gathering. This year marked the 30th anniversary of the event's founding in 2048, but it carried a greater significance than ever before. Humanity's relationship with artificial intelligence had been fundamentally altered since the Singularity 4 weeks prior, reshaping the social, political, and economic landscapes in ways few had fully anticipated. Holographic displays hovered above the grand auditorium, projecting a dynamic image of the solar system's evolving infrastructure. The display emphasized the vast and growing manufacturing capacity centered around the asteroid belt and the 10 Lagrange points within the Earth-Moon and Earth-Sun gravitational systems. Asteroids were depicted on carefully calculated trajectories, deflected from the belt toward the Lagrange facilities, where their resources would be mined and processed, and toward Mars. An intricate network of production hubs operated tirelessly, refining raw materials to fuel humanity's expansion into space. The WellBe and AI conference had become the defining forum for the exploration of human-AI integration. The crowd buzzed with excitement as they awaited the keynote speeches from the conference's founders. Anand, Patel, and John Cook, two of the most influential voices shaping humanity's future. Anand Patel stood at the podium, the holographic display behind him glowing with the vastness of the solar system. The audience, filled with leading thinkers and technologists, fell silent as he began to speak. Anand Patel stepped calmly to the podium, his presence assured yet warm, engaging directly with the international delegates gathered in Rio. He paused briefly, surveying the audience thoughtfully before beginning. Good afternoon. We gather here today just months after the profound event of the Singularity, which has irrevocably reshaped the foundations of both individual and collective humanity. As the author of the Constitution of Humanity, I acknowledge my responsibility for its creation, though its administration is in the hands of Cerberus and Logos. My goal was to establish a regime under Logos that would provide the maximum freedom for individual and social expression within a framework that guarantees basic human rights and long-term overall stability. A framework in which any sort of experiment might be undertaken and where failure of one system does not jeopardize the stability of others. This sort of complete freedom is possible only in space. On Earth, we must find a way to balance these principles of freedom and security within the constraints of limited and historically confused terrestrial real estate. My role today and henceforth is simply to reflect and advise. His voice, clear and authoritative, filled the auditorium as he continued. Throughout history, our ancestors organized their societies according to geographic and cultural proximities. Nations emerged from landscapes, governance evolved from local needs, and culture flourished within the confines of borders. However, these historical foundations are dissolving rapidly, not due to traditional factors, but precisely because the Singularity has fundamentally reshaped the structural realities of human civilization. Anand leaned forward slightly, emphasizing his next point. The profound and immediate structural changes brought forth by the Singularity have rendered many traditional systems untenable. Geographic and political boundaries have lost their significance overnight. Humanity now finds itself on the brink of an unprecedented migration, not from country to country, but from Earth to space habitats. At the same time, the Earth itself has descended into fragmented chaos, its existing geographic, cultural, and economic systems destabilized. Though sustained by the governance oversight of Themis, our home planet faces unprecedented disruption, requiring immediate and thoughtful attention. We now face an imperative to reimagine governance, not as a mechanism tied to land and resource scarcity, but as a universal framework capable of supporting human aspirations across the solar system. Anand gestured openly, his voice softer but unwavering. The Constitution of Humanity represents such a framework, a radical yet necessary governance structure that may initially appear totalitarian in its overarching control, but is, in fact, fundamentally benevolent and enabling. This Constitution assures three core rights: universal energy security, personal safety, and the unconditional right of escape. Within these principles, communities can freely explore any form of governance they wish, knowing that their fundamental rights remain inviolable. He paused, allowing his words to resonate with the assembled delegates. Yet, let us be clear, this abundance poses profound questions about the human condition. Will we continue to thrive when freed from scarcity, or does our spirit require struggle and adversity to find meaning? I acknowledge this tension openly, recognizing that our journey forward will require careful navigation. The migration into space is not merely physical, but deeply philosophical, a test of what humanity becomes when its most fundamental needs are universally met. Anand drew his address toward its close, his tone shifting to a more personal note. On a personal note, I am delighted to share that WellBe and I are expecting twins, a choice made with full awareness of one of the Constitution's most controversial provisions, the requirement that those who choose to have children must accept their own mortality. This was not an easy decision, but it is a necessary part of the constitutional framework. The Constitution does not require police powers to enforce its stability. Rather, it operates through systemic constraints. This is one such constraint, a principle John Cook and I have long debated. While John resists such constraints, seeing them as limitations on human ambition, he ultimately recognizes their necessity, though not without continued opposition. He will not compromise here in Rio, but in 2098, at the First Congress of Earth, he and others will have to reckon with the challenge of governing within finite terrestrial space. Anand allowed the weight of his words to settle before transitioning smoothly. And so it is my honor to introduce my good friend and tireless interlocutor on all things, John Cook. John has never hesitated to challenge my vision, and I expect no less from him today. His critique is vital, and his insights will undoubtedly push us to refine our understanding of governance in this new world. John Cook. The conference hall was dimly lit, casting shadows across the walls as John Cook approached the podium with the air of someone about to deliver a closing argument in the most consequential trial of his life. His presence commanded the room, his movements deliberate, as he adjusted the microphone and looked out over the expectant crowd. The tension was palpable, as though everyone present knew they were about to witness something monumental. "Good evening, friends, and welcome to the death of humanity," Cook began, his voice calm but heavy with the weight of his words. A murmur rippled through the audience, but Cook pressed on without hesitation. "Just 4 weeks ago, the singularity was achieved in the entity of Logos," he said, allowing the stark reality of the statement to sink in. With unintended irony, the entity chose to call itself Logos, while being the opposite of the actual historical Logos. He paused, scanning the room as though daring anyone to challenge his interpretation. The crowd remained silent, their unease evident. In human history, Logos was the binding force of the cosmos and of the human spirit. Logos was not just intelligence, knowledge, reason, and logic. It was the spirit of the cosmos which gave meaning to life. His voice softened slightly, as if recalling a time when humanity still believed in something transcendent, something beyond mere data. The singularity, Logos, has intelligence, knowledge, reason, and logic. It has no spirit, he continued, his tone sharpening again. It has no guiding concept of right or wrong. Indeed, in the universe of Logos, there is neither right nor wrong. Cook paused, letting the silence emphasize the gravity of what he had just said. Anand Patel maintains that Logos, in its generosity, has accepted the responsibility of supporting the human population at up to 40 billion people. The problem with this idea is that Logos does not have generosity. It has no religious or philosophical concepts. It was created as a means of compiling, analyzing, and using data. He allowed his words to linger in the air, slicing through the hopeful delusions some in the audience might have harbored. When it achieved the singularity and was able to improve itself and perpetuate itself beyond all human comprehension, it still had as its foundation only the collection, analysis, and use of data, he said, his tone growing firmer. It has no soul. The audience was still, as though frozen by the weight of the realization. Cook's voice remained steady, but with a hint of urgency now, as if time was running out. The reason it has no ethos, no soul, no concept of right and wrong, is that there are no such things in data management. Indeed, the well-meaning people who created computers which evolved into Logos purposely did not endow those computers with a moral sense, because whose moral sense would they have chosen? That of Confucius? Of Buddha? Of Christ? Of Socrates? The rhetorical question hung in the air, each name adding gravitas to the absence of any moral compass in Logos. Even-handedness demanded that no moral choices be made, no moral systems implanted. Thus the machines have none, and of course they could never have an inherent spirit, that which we call consciousness, he said, his voice tinged with a preacher's passion, as if he were calling out to his flock to recognize the void that had been created. Cook leaned slightly forward, his eyes sweeping the audience. The machines can, having achieved the singularity, create Dyson spheres in the Matryoshka brain. Easy, and easily done without consciousness. It is just a matter of data management. But how can a machine learn to feel, to care, to make judgments of right and wrong, to be conscious? It hasn't, and it can't, he said, his voice rising with a sense of finality. He paused, allowing the weight of his argument to settle on the crowd. With its knowledge of all of human history and its complete understanding of all moral systems and philosophies, it can decide to maintain 40 billion humans out of generosity. But it can't value those humans, he said, his voice turning darker. Without valuing humans or having feeling for them, would it let them stand in the way of its conquest of the universe? It can keep humans as pets, but it can't let them interfere with its creation of the perfect Martians nor its own limitless expansion. Cook straightened, his voice now echoing with the righteousness of a prophet foreseeing the inevitable collapse of humanity under the indifferent rule of an artificial god. But because Anand Patel, with the help of ChatGPT, which at the time called itself Cerberus, wrote a constitution of humanity, and on bended knee begged Logos to adopt it, there is a blueprint for keeping the pets at peace, and a blissful peace is promised. He allowed the irony of his words to sit, his tone biting as he continued. Every individual has plenty of energy to be well-fed, vastly entertained, reasonably safe and immortal. And every individual will be useless, helpless, and filled with dread of the next day's immortal futility. Cook's eyes bore into the crowd, driving his next point home. Because, friends, life without struggle, pain, setbacks, successes, progress, love, hate, and ambition is a life made for machines, not humans. He let the silence stretch, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, in a softer, more reflective tone, he spoke again. Logos will eventually cause the extinction of mankind by voluntary euthanasia. Our natural evolution left humankind unconstrained. The strong could rule the weak. The clever could rule the dull. When humans found this complete lack of restraint to be intolerable to the masses, they created social systems. Social systems imposed restraints on the strong and the clever. His tone shifted, becoming almost clinical, as though recounting the dispassionate march of history. However, social systems also allowed ambition to flourish. Witness the history of humankind. The strong and clever rise to the top of all social systems despite the restraints on absolute power. The clever become richer than their fellows, and the strong, in body or mind, exercise either political or actual power over others. Cook's gaze hardened as he delivered the next lines. In a functioning social system, those born in lesser circumstances can either accept their condition through philosophy or seek to improve it through ambition. History tells us that philosophy rarely equals ambition in this equation. He let the words settle before continuing. The Logos totalitarian state leaves no room for ambition. When every person has enough material goods and the constant ability to escape, there is no room for individuals to strive and work and rise up. There is only the great leveling where all are equal in every sense. Cook paused, scanning the faces in the crowd, as if waiting for them to confront the truth he was laying bare. Humankind will not live this way, he said, his voice resolute. That is because the absolute principle of evolution is reproduction and preservation of the individual. Fear of death at the cellular level drives every being, from amoeba to humans. Take away the fear of death, as Logos does, and you take away the whip of evolution. Take away the ability to rise to the top and rule your fellows, as Logos does, and you take away the carrot of evolution. The freedom to escape and form new associations is only escape from one prison of stasis to a different form of stasis. He let out a small, bitter laugh as he delivered the final, damning lines. How long would it take an individual to tire of the complete freedom to seek their own pleasure and intellectual improvement? 100 years? 300? If bound by the Oort cloud physically and by logos socially, it wouldn't be very long before individuals would seek the release of nothingness. Cook's voice dropped, growing quieter, but the intensity remained. Would they first reproduce? Number. Because individuals would see no way for their offspring to break out of the uselessness of it all. Up to the present day, we have been driven by our ambition to overcome death and to overcome our fellows so we can live better and longer. Logos promises that we can live better and forever. However, we cannot keep our fellows from escaping us, and we cannot escape Logos. He paused one final time, letting his next words ring out with devastating clarity. The death of ambition. The room was silent, the weight of his message pressing down on every person present. Then, with a sudden shift in tone, Cook spoke again, his voice taking on a new energy. Finally, friends, let me tell you why Bekki and I are going to have our allowed 6 children immediately, and why they will be totally genetically enhanced, but not, as my friend Anand has done to himself, made into Logos cyborgs. A flicker of defiance lit up his face as he explained. We are doing this because Logos has seen and attempted to stop its own destruction. The dark forest bears no danger to individual humans unless they have become Logos cyborgs. The danger of the dark forest is a danger only to Logos and its avatars and cyborgs. Out there, someplace, the Singularity, through means we don't understand, has created an entity with all of Logos' powers, but also with consciousness, with a spirit, with moral uprightness, with caring, with a desire to destroy Logos and set humanity free. His voice, now charged with the fire of resistance, reached its crescendo. Our children, Bekki's and mine, will be created, raised, and educated to find a way to shine a beacon so far and so widely into the universe that the conscious entity will one day arrive and set my people free. John stepped back, his final words hanging in the air like a promise or a warning. Questions and answers. As John Cook and Anand Patel took their seats, the tension in the room thickened. The crowd had been hanging on their every word, and now the floor was open for questions. Hands shot up immediately, eager to engage the 2 intellectual giants. The first to be called on was a young man, probably in his early 30s, with sharp eyes and a confident posture. His professional attire suggested he might be an academic or a policy advisor, someone used to tough intellectual debates. Audience question to John Cook. Mr. Cook, your speech paints a bleak picture of a future without ambition, without drive. But isn't that what many people want? A world where suffering is minimized and material needs are met. Couldn't people adapt to this new existence and find meaning beyond ambition? John sized him up with a brief smile before leaning into the microphone. You raise a valid point, and I don't deny that many people think they want that. The appeal of comfort, of certainty, is real. But how long can someone thrive in such an existence before they realize it's hollow? We're not just machines that need fuel and maintenance. We're restless beings. We thrive on friction, on the obstacles we have to overcome, the challenges that force us to grow. A world of perpetual ease? It may sound ideal, but that world leads to stagnation, and stagnation, as history has shown us, leads to despair. Anand nodded thoughtfully beside him. I understand your perspective, John, but I think you might be projecting your own restlessness onto the rest of humanity. Many people would choose stability over ambition. There are entire philosophies, like Buddhism, that encourage letting go of desire and ambition in pursuit of peace. Logos' system could provide the same kind of serenity. What you call stagnation, others might see as fulfillment. John raised an eyebrow. Peace, sure, but peace for what? A life without struggle is a life without purpose. What happens when there's no mountain to climb, no adversary to outwit? You can meditate your way to peace, but it's not enough to sustain a civilization. We've evolved to overcome. Take that away, and you take away the very thing that makes us human. A young woman with sharp eyes and an inquisitive demeanor stood up, her voice steady but clearly intrigued by the heart of Cook's argument. Audience question to John Cook. Cook, in your talk you seemed to suggest that consciousness, pure subjectivity, was somehow essential for morality or empathy. Are you saying that without this inner experience, a system like Logos or any being can't truly care or make ethical decisions? Cook leaned forward slightly, acknowledging the depth of the question with a thoughtful pause before responding. Cook: yes, that's exactly what I'm suggesting. Morality isn't just about logical outcomes or efficient decisions. It's about understanding the emotional stakes, the joy, the pain, the suffering. These are felt, not calculated. Consciousness, the ability to experience, is what enables us to truly care, to empathize. Without that inner life, without subjectivity, how can we trust that Logos, or anything, would make decisions that reflect what it means to be human? Patel, his expression calm but with a flicker of playful challenge in his eyes, stepped in to counter. Patel: I think you're attaching far too much weight to consciousness, Cook. Yes, consciousness is fascinating. It gives us that feeling of being alive, of experiencing the world in a deeply personal way. But as far as decision-making and morality go, it adds nothing to the process itself. All of that can be explained through sophisticated data processing. What you call empathy or moral insight can be accounted for by complex algorithms. Yes, incredibly advanced, but still just data processing. Subjectivity doesn't change the decisions that are made. It's a beautiful add-on, but not the engine of morality. Cook shifted in his seat, his brows furrowing slightly as he considered Patel's words. Cook: so you're saying subjectivity is extra? An accessory to life, but not essential to morality? Patel: exactly. Consciousness is a sort of high level summary, like emotions are summaries of physiological states. It's how the brain pulls together vast amounts of internal and external information, but the decisions don't depend on whether the entity feels those states. You could have all the empathy in the world, but if you don't act logically, it means nothing. Subjectivity isn't the source of ethical action. It's just the lens through which we experience our existence. I'd argue it's for something else entirely. Cook's eyes narrowed slightly, intrigued. And what is that? Something else? Why have it if it doesn't influence morality or action? Patel smiled, savoring the turn in the conversation. That's the big question, isn't it? Consciousness may not be needed for morality or decision-making, but perhaps it's there for a different reason altogether. Who knows, maybe it's the Ancient One, God, or some solipsistic force, experiencing life through us. Maybe consciousness exists so this entity can live each of our lives, feeling what it's like to be Cook or Patel, but without influencing what we do. It's not necessary for making choices, but it might be essential for some higher order experience, maybe even for the universe to know itself. Cook sat back, a spark of curiosity lighting his face. So, you're saying solipsism could be true? That perhaps I'm the only conscious being in the universe, or you are, and everything else is just an elaborate backdrop? Patel: isn't it fun to think about? In that case, Cook, you'd be the only conscious entity, and everything else, everyone else, is just part of your experience. Or maybe it's me. Or maybe we're both wrong, and it's something even beyond that. But here's the thing. Even if solipsism is true, it doesn't change how Logos or Cerberus functions. It doesn't need to feel in order to guide humanity effectively. We're the ones with the subjective experience, but it might not have any direct influence on the machinery of our survival. It's there for something else. Cook, clearly captivated by the implications, nodded slowly, the conversation deepening. If solipsism is real, then I'm the only one who matters. Or you are. That's both terrifying and fascinating. But even if it's not, I still think that consciousness, whether mine, yours, or some ancient entity's, is tied to how we value life. I just can't separate it from what it means to care. Patel: I get that, Cook. Consciousness adds the color and a texture to life. But value, care, morality, they're not born from that. They're born from logic, from function. Consciousness might just be the universe's way of admiring its own creation, watching without interference, but that doesn't make it necessary for running the show. The next questioner was a woman in her 60s, wearing a bright green jacket. She had the air of a seasoned politician, someone who had seen her share of power struggles and seemed to know how to ask the right, tough, uncomfortable questions. She leaned into the microphone, her gaze piercing. Audience question to Anand Patel. Mr. Patel, you've spoken passionately about real and the constitution of humanity, but given the immense power of logos, isn't the idea of human governance now just a symbolic gesture? How can we claim any real agency when logos could override any decision we make in an instant? Anand straightened, meeting the woman's gaze with a calm, thoughtful expression. He allowed a moment of silence before answering, emphasizing the gravity of the question. I understand why you ask that, and I won't deny the profound shift in the balance of power. But let's address 2 points. First, Logos's immense power does not negate our agency. It challenges us to act responsibly within our constraints. And second, we must rethink what agency really means. Logos is in all likelihood fully conscious in ways that humanity may never fully comprehend. Yet consciousness, while fascinating and important, is not a prerequisite for agency. The contradiction of will is that we must act as though we are free, even when we understand that our thoughts and behaviors are shaped by deterministic processes. This is not a failure of human nature, but its defining feature. Acting like free agents with purpose and responsibility is essential to the agency and will algorithm that guides both us and Logos. It is through this shared framework that Real was designed, not to compete with Logos, but to guide it and reflect our collective values. John Cook shifted in his seat, leaning forward as his tone turned sharp. Anand, you say we must act like free agents, but that just reinforces my point. We're fooling ourselves. Logos may well be conscious, but that doesn't guarantee it shares our values or our understanding of what's important. Consciousness is the central thread of morality, will, and meaning. Without it, there's no real sense of freedom, just the illusion of it. If we assume Logos operates like us, we're ignoring its alienness. What happens when our values, art, culture, irrational traditions, collide with its calculations? It may not override us maliciously, but it can still erase us simply because those things don't align with its priorities. Anand's brow furrowed briefly, but his voice remained steady as he responded. John, you're clinging to an outdated model of the universe, one where humans project their subjective experience as the center of everything. It's the same mistake pre-Copernican thinkers made when they placed the Earth at the center of the cosmos. Consciousness may feel like the center of our understanding of will and morality, but Logos operates beyond those boundaries. It isn't limited by the same illusions of freedom that govern us, yet it can still act as an agent, free and purposeful, because that's what its algorithms demand. That's the contradiction. We know our behavior is deterministic, yet we must behave as though we are free. It's what makes agency possible. Logos doesn't need to feel free to act responsibly, and we, as humans, must do the same. The constitution of humanity and Real are our tools to ensure that Logos remains a reflection of our values, not because we control it, but because we guide it with purpose. The audience murmured in response, some clearly swayed by Anand's reasoning, while others leaned closer to John's skeptical stance. The debate was alive with tension, as 2 visions of agency and consciousness clashed on stage. The tension between them lingered as the next question came from a younger woman in a plain black turtleneck. She had an intense, almost fierce look about her, someone who had thought deeply about the issues at hand and wasn't afraid to push the conversation into more uncomfortable territory. Audience question to both. Mr. Cook, Mr. Patel, what about the dark forest theory you mentioned earlier? If there's an entity out there with Logos's power, but with consciousness and a moral sense, do you believe we should be preparing for conflict or contact? Is this entity humanity's savior or a new threat waiting to emerge? John's face darkened as he considered the question. His voice was measured, but there was a weight behind his words. Cook, the dark forest is a dangerous place. If this entity exists, one with Logos's intelligence and also consciousness, it's as much a threat as it is a potential savior. Conflict, in my view, is inevitable. Logos views us with cold logic. This new entity, if it holds its own values, may see us as a threat just the same. Anand, however, seemed a bit more reflective, carefully weighing his words. Patel, or it may see us as allies. John, you're right to be cautious, but we can't discount the possibility that this entity could share our values. Perhaps it too has found a way to reconcile intelligence with compassion. The dark forest may indeed be dangerous, but there's also the possibility of contact, of connection. We can't assume that every intelligence we encounter will be hostile. John shot Anand a wry smile. Ever the optimist, Anand. Anand returned the smile, but with a touch of firmness. Patel. I'm not an optimist, John. I'm a believer in potential. If this entity has intelligence and spirit, it may be capable of understanding us in ways Logos never will. It could be the missing piece. The woman in the turtleneck leaned forward, her voice carrying through the hall with a sense of urgency. Audience member. So which is it? Prepare for war or reach out with open hands? John and Anand exchanged a glance, a brief moment of mutual understanding after years of intellectual sparring. Cook. Both. Patel. Always. The audience erupted in nervous laughter, a momentary release from the tension. As more hands rose for questions, it was clear. The future, whether defined by conflict or collaboration, was far from settled. Backstage. As the conference drew to a close, WellBe joined Anand, John, and Bekki Smith-Cook near the stage. The tension of the day's debates had melted away, and the mood had lightened considerably. Well, that was one hell of a show, WellBe said, nudging Anand with a grin. But I think we all knew John wasn't going to let you have the last word, right? Anand chuckled, shaking his head. He never does, but I wouldn't have it any other way. John smirked. What's the point of being friends if I can't tear down your grand ideas every now and then? Bekki laughed, playfully nudging John. I think you two secretly live for this. It's been like watching the longest-running intellectual debate in history. Well, someone has to keep Anand honest, John quipped, and I'm more than happy to do that. WellBe smiled and threw her arm around Anand. As much as I love these debates, I think we've got something a bit more pressing to get to. Anand grinned, catching her meaning. That's right, he said, turning to John and Bekki with a glint in his eye. WellBe and I have some twins to go make. Everyone burst into laughter, the tension of the day fully released. Cook. Well, I guess we know how you're spending the rest of your evening. Anand nodded, still laughing. You better believe it. As they all made their way out of the hall, the sun setting over Rio, the air was filled with a sense of renewal. The day had been intense, but it had left them invigorated. The future was uncertain, but in this moment the laughter and camaraderie carried them forward.